the Monday meeting of the Virginia-Highland Board of Directors. Call it to order at 7:03. I'd like a motion, President, our members, Lyson. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Carla.
There you go.
Ian.
And Peggy Bird and White. I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Minutes without objection, it is adopted. Let's move right to, I don't see any police and fire department reps, so they may appear later. There are messages left for them about the change in venue. And I'm going to move right to our first guest, which is Rod Pitts, the Fulton County Commission. And where is Mr. Pitts? There he is. Welcome, sir. Would you like to say hello and greetings to everybody, please?
Just hello, I wanted to stop by and have been for a while and to remind you that primary voting is early this year. We're all accustomed to primary voting in July. This year, however, it's in May 20th to be exact, and with early voting beginning on April 28th. So the key date, May 20th, not July. Very important. You're aware that there will be a pretty spirited campaign for the U.S. Senate seat, especially on the Republican side, depending on your persuasion. But that one will be very heated, not so much so on the Democratic side. The governor's race, Governor obviously Jason Carter on the Democratic side, on down the line. But specifically, what I'm interested in, Fulton County races with the redistricting and so forth. There's going to be a lot of interest there. I'm not standing here to tell you who to vote for, except in my case, I'm hoping to move up. I've served you for 10 years after serving the city for many years. I've been at the Fulton County Commission now, and there's a serious need for leadership, which is why I'm running for chairman this year, and I urge you to remember those 2 days, May 20th, Election Day, April 28th, early voting. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming to We'll move on to the budget committee. Ms. Bird.
Had 2 items today. I wanted to introduce Greg Boson, who is our certified public accountant and has just prepared our tax return. So thank you.
This is me. And I'm in the neighborhood too. So this is the second year I've done the return. But
Thank you.
you're welcome.
If you're coming in, if you wouldn't mind signing in, here at this table.
The other item from the budget committee tonight is a request. We had a good financial year at the Civic Association last year. We, at the same time, took very good control of our expenses. And as a result, we have some money on hand. Our largest liability is the money that we borrowed for New Highland Park. And as a sort of conservative means of managing our finances as an organization, I would like to make a motion that we pay down the mortgage on New Highland Park by $50,000 now, and that if we have another good year this year, we consider an additional payment against principal later in the year.
I'm going to take the first part as a motion only. The motion is to pay it down to 50 right now. And we will consider things later, so that's acceptable to you. But we'll pay down 50 now is the action item in front of us here. We'll get to the other part later, the results. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All right, we discussed this briefly at a couple of meetings. Is there any comments or questions that anyone wants to make at this time? It does appear completely solid and justified, and we're still on very firm ground for this budget year. Questions or comments from anyone in the audience?
I think it's a great idea.
What is the balance?
There you
for
go.
the neighborhood?
$567,000.
Further comments or questions? All right, all those in favor on the board, please, in favor of this motion to pay down $50,000, please. It is unanimous. So moved. Thank you for coming. I'm glad to meet you.
Sure. You should also say the value of the land if you want, so it doesn't sound so bad. Because you paid 8.
I think many people here are familiar with the value of the land, but if they're not, if we need to sell it, they will quickly.
It's a lot more than $565,000. Okay.
In any case, thank you. We trust this return will go swimmingly. We have full faith in you. On to the planning committee, Ms. Carlisle.
Our first item on the agenda is 976 Virginia, but I didn't, are the applicants here?
They're not, we waiting for their appearance.
Oh, that's right, okay, so, we just had an action item on that, and we voted on prior, it was a simple change to various requests.
It amends a previously approved motion by 1 foot to make absolutely certain that the previously constructed item is completely compliant. And I would recommend, I think we, planning committee unanimously recommend adoption. Without questions, I would move that we do so hereby. Is there any question? All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you very much.
The next item is, Toscano and Sons Italian Market. It's an alcohol license transfer, and we have Kathy Bower here. So you would just explain what you're doing in transferring the license and how you,
Okay.
what you're serving and your processes to make sure everything goes through.
We're Italian market, all food, wine, cheese, meats, all of that. We've been in business for almost 7.5 years. We're on the west side for 6.5 years. We moved over here, we opened in December, and now we're just transferring our alcohol license. It's for off-site consumption only. We only sell Italian wine and some Italian microbrew beers. And like I said, it's off-site consumption only. You're not allowed to drink on the premises. We are allowed to do specialty food category to do a wine tasting every now and then. Which we do. But that's basically what we're trying to do this transfer.
The alcohol violations at your previous location?
Never.
Brought up at any time with anything before the license review board?
Nope.
How do you put your training program through? You card everyone, I think you told us that comes in?
Right, everyone, we take all of our employees, the employees that are actually, because not all our employees are on the POS, the point of sale. There's just a few of us, and so we're the ones who are actually bringing folks up, and so those folks are the ones who we train, what to look for, how to card people, make sure that the license or whatever government ID they give them is valid.
No on-site consumption, again, to repeat, other than the wine tasting.
Other than wine tastings.
Any questions for this? The planning committee recommended unanimous approval, I think. Any questions from the audience for this applicant who's opposite the fire station beside the paper source? Any questions from the board? What is your motion?
Move to approve the transfer of the liquor license, Toscano and Sons Italian to the North Highland location.
Second.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. Kathy, next week at the NPU at Hillside, 7 p.m.
Okay, thanks a lot.
It'll be later there, but.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Next is 1431 669 Allen Drive. Applicant Jennifer Hanson, I believe Mark Arnold is here to present. Mark, are you almost ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, great.
The copies, like they have a little beard still on them? Okay, a little bit of beard still on them, sorry.
Honest, Mark.
It's a long, daylight savings time is really hard for me. So, yeah, they're all wet with beard, sorry. Can't really.
Is it the craft beer?
It was an IPA.
There we go.
Yeah.
You did brief if you will.
These are clean copies if anyone wants. And a multi, you can take that one too. A little bit of beer on the top, right? Okay, so this is about as straightforward as they come. This is 669 Elmwood, the existing house. I don't know which way to turn it. It already sits within the side yard and the front yard setbacks. I'm not changing the footprint. Really, we're expanding out, we're building out an unfinished attic, but not raising the ridge line. This is fancy, so the front back. Okay, so that's the existing side elevation. That's photographed. that ridge is not changing. We're really just bringing out a new perpendicular gable. So that's the new ridge. The front elevation, I think it's much. Existing, proposed, it stays the same. It looks different because this has some patterning on it. The back elevation, there's a lot of change. It's the back side of the gable. This is the new perpendicular gable that ties in. The on those small copies, it may be, on the small copies, there's a line, and it's real small here, so it's real faint. There's a line here that shows the setback. It's really just this back corner and this front dormer that sits within the existing setback that the house already sits in. And that necessitates the need for variance. Other than that, we're not taking any setback less than it is now. The lot already exceeds lot coverage. It's at 57%, which 50% is required. But we're not changing that, and we're not changing the footprint, so we just accept the 57% for what it is. And the floor area ratio is right at the maximum. I think I got it at 49.9%. It's a really small lot. It's 5,107 square feet, where normally 9,000 is required. So it's a tiny lot, but we're still in the floor area ratio. The homeowners met with all the neighbors, 8 adjacent neighbors, and she has signatures from all of them saying they reviewed the plans and had a chance to look at it.
Thank you very much, Mark. You were on the site visit, Jess, with any tree issues, any stormwater issues?
No, so on site, there were no trees that would be impacted by construction. They weren't in the construction zone. Stormwater didn't seem to be a problem impacting neighbors. Seems like a good fit.
Any questions from anyone in the audience? Any comments from anyone on the board? Lola, planning, what was the recommendation?
We recommended approval, based on the site plans, so I recommend, move to approve based on the site plans dated February 19, 2014.
Second.
Any further discussion or questions, comments? All those in favor, raise your hand. Unanimous. Thank you for so next week. B1412, 959 Todd Road is recommended for deferral. Requires no action from this board. And I think that concludes the planning committee, is that right? We're moving back. Parks committee, I think you have an item to report to Ms. Fraley.
Yes, so our plans are still at the city permitting office waiting to be approved or stamped. So plans for John Howell Park renovation, sorry, I should have said that. For those who've been watching meetings, we've been working on this for a year or longer now. So the plans are kind of in the final stage, just waiting on the city to approve them, and then we're moving forward with renovations at the park. So it'll be on the volleyball end, the volleyball court side of the park, to add a retaining wall there for sand as well as some other improvements.
Should be the last chance to get sand out of the street on Arcadia once this is done. Vast improvement. Thank you very much. Lola, we have one site change by way of calendar items to announce.
Yeah, the library is closing on Wednesday nights, or all day Wednesday now. So we need to move our planning meetings, and Church of Our Savior has been our second home, so we're going to now have planning meetings at Garrison Hall. So now moving forward with that.
And Mr. Pitts, I will say, while we certainly are not pointing any fingers straight at you, that this library is one of the, I think, the 4th or 5th busiest in the system after much larger libraries. It's been a center for this neighborhood for years, and as you know, library usage goes up during times of stress, and we will be okay, but I mean, the citizens of this, there was huge conversations on the social media boards and great despair to notice. So I hope, as the county's financial condition improves, that restoring library hours will be a...
Right, just on that point, just for the record, I did not support that. The vote was 5-2, and I was opposed to tampering with our libraries because the voters said yes to a $275 million bond referendum. It makes no sense at all to begin to close the branches or reduce the hours while construction is, for the most part, just beginning. But the good news is I think we're going to try to restore those hours through some further discussion. That was done on the spur of the moment. Before thought, any planning was done at the last minute, and I just didn't support it.
Thank you, Mr. Pettis. Look forward to those changes that come on the amendment. Is there any other business that we have now? We have a very truncated agenda for reasons so that we can get Ms. Wyndham and Ms. Keenan on the floor to introduce Aaron. Is there any other business we need to transact here tonight? All right. Thank you, everybody, for your attention here. Jess and Jennifer, y'all have the floor.
Well, hello everybody, welcome. I think a lot of you are here to get some preliminary information on the master plan. And Aaron Fortner, the planning consultant who has been working on the plan for the last 6 months, is here. He's going to provide an overview of some of the major concepts of the plan to the board. And we want to have an opportunity for you all to ask questions. So what we'd like to do is to have everyone, if you have a question, submit it on a card, and please put your name and address. And we'll do questions for about 30 minutes, and any questions that we don't get to, we will publish frequently asked questions document. So that's the format that we're going to use for questions. After Aaron gives his talk, we'll collect the cards. And this is not the only opportunity to review the plan and comment on the plan. The plan was just published today. Again, this is Aaron's opportunity to provide an overview of the major concepts. The plan is online on the master plan website and is available for comment through the website so that people have an opportunity to review the plan, which is 142 pages. So it's voluminous. It'll certainly take a while to review and digest, and then people will have an opportunity to provide specific comments on the website. And when you go through the plan, you'll see that Aaron has captured all of the comments that have been made over this 6-month process. So the comments that are submitted on the draft plan, it will be the same format. They will be collected and segregated and tallied so that all the comments will be in one place. We are planning on having an open house soon, date to be determined, but in the next 2 or 3 weeks, where what we would like to do is have posters that provide the main or the recommendation sections of the plan, so that if people have any questions, what does this mean, how does this work, we'll be able to provide input and clarification on the points on the plans. Jess Wyndham is the co-chair of the steering committee, and we have been working very hard with the wonderful members of the steering committee to get this plan out to you all. So Jess, do you have anything to add? Covered it. I think the master plan is really more than we expected, and it's beyond our hopes, and I'm really excited that it captured so much plans that already affect Virginia-Highland, all of the comments, and so it might seem like a lot, but it's really a lot of rich information. If you didn't get the next card, just raise your hand.
Okay, so we'll turn it over to Aaron Fortner of Marketing Management.
Thank you. I'm going to pass out this, I'm not going to pass out, I don't think. Handing out a handout of what I'm going to talk through for tonight. So let me touch on schedule, and then I'll get into a little bit of the substance of the plan. So I like to just sort of assume, especially for board members, that maybe you didn't know what we've been doing, so I'm just going to kind of assume that you don't know, and thinking you probably do know, but I just want to take that approach. So starting in October, we had a whole month of the website that was up and active, and we had about 100 responses through the website in the month of October. And all it was doing was asking, what do you love about Virginia-Highland? What would you love to see change? What would you love to see preserved? What are ideas that you have for Virginia-Highland? And for a month, the website was collecting that information. We have that interactive map that you could go onto and actually put a pin in a specific location in the neighborhood and make your comment about what you loved or want to see change. So that was the month of October. In November, we had a design charrette in this building. where we spent a whole day. We started early in the morning so people could come by on the way to work. And we were here all the way through the evening, where we did an evening meeting presentation and reflected back some of the very initial concepts that were coming up through the planning process, taking into account what we were already hearing from what people were saying they wanted to see change, what they wanted to see preserved. So that was in November, and we put those concepts also up on the website. We had about 40 people or so that came during the day at the charrette. We had another 60 or so that came at night. And then we had all that content on the website. And so we got about another 100 comments on the website on all of these concepts. So with all that feedback, we had another meeting in January where we integrated the feedback that we've been hearing and presented revised concepts, new concepts, and put that out. And we had that content on the website for a month. And that all is now folded into the master plan, the draft of the master plan. As Jennifer said, the plan was posted today, but it will stay up, and I'll get on that. I'll touch on that schedule. So the other thing we've done is we've had focus groups. What I like to do is to make sure that there's certain issues in a neighborhood that, as a planner, really for me, I like to make sure that I'm able to hear from some folks that maybe have a little bit more knowledge on particular topics. So education in the schools were one, for example, that you all have a very organized structure in the neighborhood with interacting with the schools, and I wanted to make sure when we go through this process that we were able to hear from folks about schools and what they thought about what could be done better in the neighborhood as related to schools. We talked to some of the business and commercial property owners as well. Basically, people that wanted to make sure that we didn't go through the whole process and miss hearing something very specific that they may have to say about their particular area of interest. So we had these focus groups that were business, transportation, schools, environment, and land use. We also had a steering committee of about 10 people that met pretty much monthly, that continued to guide and weigh in and help us understand where we were going and to make adjustments as we went through the process. And then we also had opportunities to meet with the City of Atlanta, with the planning staff, public works, council member, to weigh in, let them know where we were, get their feedback, and interact with them throughout the process. So a lot of weighing in from these different folks. Our remaining schedule is, today is when the draft was released. As Jennifer said, we'll have an open house that'll be to be determined. And then April 1st is when we'll stop taking comments on the draft that's out today. So between now and April 1st, we'll keep taking comments on the website. April 4th, we'll produce a revised draft that reflects the things that we will have heard through the website. April 14th, we'll come back to you to present and go over any changes that have been made to the draft between now and then. And then it would go to the NPU on April 21st, not for any approval, but it would go just for their information and also to ask them for support. And then May and June, it would move through the city's official process of becoming an official master plan. And just to give you a quick update, one of the things that you were motivated by to even do a master plan was to be eligible for funding through the bond the city is going to be doing to do infrastructure projects, things like sidewalks and open space and intersections and crosswalks and pedestrian lights and all those kinds of things. It'll be about a $250 to $300 million bond. It's similar to the one that was done in 2000 through the City of Atlanta. It's about a $250, $300 million bond. And so the city is only, though, going to fund projects that have been approved by an official master plan. So that was one of the motivators for doing this plan, because you don't have an official master plan for the whole neighborhood. And so that is now scheduled to take place. It'll go to vote. We'll all go and vote on it. That's supposed to be now next summer. So you're on a good schedule. You will be able to get this done in time to be an official master plan and get your projects funded through that bond. So that's good news. Okay, so that's a little bit of the schedule, where we started, how we started, and where we are, and what we have left. Now, so for the plan update, The first thing is, it's the website. That's really the resource that you'll want to go to get the draft of the plan. As was said, it's a large document. It's about, make sure you got some space on your computer. It's about 150 pages. But the reason it's that long is because it really does reflect the whole process to date. The plan starts from day one and talks about and summarizes every public meeting we've had. It summarizes the feedback we've gotten on the website. Every piece of feedback we've gotten, we have reflected in the plan. So whether someone was for something or against something, all of that is reflected and even quantified within the plan to note how many were in support of this concept and how many were not in support of a certain concept. So all of that tells that story from beginning to end of what we've heard so far.
Does that include just the focus groups, or is that?
No, everything. Every public meeting, the design charrette that we have here, everything we've gotten through the website, on everything we've put up on the website, focus group summaries, all of that's in the document. But then the other thing we've done is that we are reflecting the plans that have been done to date. And to date, there's been a lot of plans that have been done around Virginia-Highland and for portions of Virginia-Highland. I've listed them here. In 1999, there was a North Highland study. So a study that was done just on the North Highland corridor. There was a study that was done of Ponce. Some of you might remember that. It was called the Ponce LCI. So there was a plan done for the whole Ponce corridor, and that incorporated the Ponce frontage for your neighborhood. There was a Beltline plan that was done, which incorporated the west portion of the neighborhood. So you had the west portion done, you had the southern portion done of Ponce, you had a North Highland study done down the center. There's the comprehensive development plan, the overarching policy guiding document for the city that touches down on different topics for your neighborhood, that addresses your neighborhood in different ways. There was a Connect Atlanta plan, which is the city's transportation plan that ends up addressing certain streets in your neighborhood, like Monroe Drive and other streets. And then there's a newer plan the city has adopted called the Cycle Atlanta plan that starts to deal with portions on the west side of your neighborhood, Cayuga and Virginia and Monroe. So the starting point for our work was really all the previous plans that the city has done and adopted and approved and have become city policy. So the planning process is a little bit of triangulation, right? It's partly, let's talk to the community, let's hear from the community. That's one point of the plan. Another point is all of this public policy, all the plans that have been approved. That's another point. Because when we're creating a city plan, we have to sort of deal with existing city policies, which is what all these plans are. So that's another point in that. And then the other point of the triangulation is just our planning team and our professionals and our transportation planners and land use and our planning team weighing in and helping to speak into the planning process. So it's that triangulation that helps us arrive at what is doable, what we think is implementable, and what do we think has consensus in the community. And what does the city support? What will the city allow you to do? What is the city saying that is in line with public policy or is in line with regulations, that we have to keep weighing that into the process? So that's what we've had to take into account. The master plan document also does walk through these plans and policies. And every policy that's in place through these plans for your neighborhood are listed in the master plan. And so some of the things that we've articulated in the master plan are actually a reflection of things that have already been planned and a part of public policy. And I'll touch on these as I get into the individual concepts. So now getting into some of the details of the plan, I will say the first thing is that the overwhelming, overarching concept of the plan is that most people see Virginia-Highland as a place that should be this model in the region and in the city for healthy living. And a lot of people weighed in and said that in different ways. There's people who said that by talking about exercise and recreation. We talked about being able to get to the belt line and use the belt line and bike across the neighborhood or walk across the neighborhood or get to a park in the neighborhood. So recreation and being active, having an active lifestyle was one way people expressed that. Some people talked about that environmentally and wanting to focus on making sure stormwater issues are being addressed and having a clean neighborhood is being addressed, whether that's the sewer system, whether that's encouraging recycling, whether that's trying to make sure just litter or blight, general blight is addressed. So this kind of idea of clean, having a clean neighborhood, it's another way people talked about it. Other people talked about it in terms of being a place where kids can live. People talked about it in terms of wanting to make sure the schools were still good and accessible and not overcrowded, and that you could walk to school or you could bike to school, and that this still could be a place for families and for kids. So there were different ways people talked about it. Some people even talked about it through agriculture, and let's be a place where we can model what it's like to have agriculture as sort of the heart of what we're doing and accessible to the community. So there are different ways people said it, but the overarching concept was this idea that you group that all together into just a healthy community. And that really rose to the top. So we really set that in the plan as the real defining vision, the overarching defining vision of the neighborhood. And what would be fun is to continue as a neighborhood, 5 and 10 years, to continue to explore all the ways that you can play that out in your neighborhood. For some people, it's going to be the agriculture folks who want to do the urban agriculture, and other folks, it's going to take on a different way. But healthy living is really broad enough that a lot of people can be invited into that, and it'd be fun to explore all the ways as a neighborhood that you can play that out. I think also this healthy living heartbeat is something that is what you never would have gotten from all of the plans that were listed above. I think this vision is something that starts to speak to why you want to do a neighborhood master plan, because the North Highland study would not have gotten that vision for a neighborhood, and the Pont study wouldn't have done that, the Beltline plan wouldn't have done that. So I really liked that when we just stopped and asked about your whole neighborhood, that was one of the things that really rose to the top. And I think that's what you get when you start to just focus on the whole neighborhood. Okay, so I want to cover some of the key concepts that have emerged through the master plan. And each of these, almost all of these, it's been a real evolving conversation as we've monitored the feedback of these concepts through the process. Most of these are not now in the plan what we started with because of the feedback that we've received. There's many recommendations in the plan, and many of them really have overwhelming consensus there. Some of them are small, some of them are big, but there's just some clear, overwhelming support. But I want to talk to the ones that have been an evolving conversation, because I want you to know about those and be able to track how these have progressed through the process. So Monroe Drive is the first one. And Monroe Drive is one of these ideas and concepts that did start in another policy document. So this is one of those ones that you as a neighborhood, you've inherited this concept. It didn't emerge and come out of this process. So Monroe Drive, the concept is what's called a road diet that is happening in cities all over the country where at a certain threshold of traffic numbers, this works, where a thoroughfare that has 4 lanes, so 2 in each direction, the middle lanes end up basically becoming de facto turn lanes, because anyone who has to turn off the corridor does so from the inside lane. And when the inside lane becomes the de facto turn lane, then it's really the outside lane that becomes the 3 lanes. And so the concept of road diets is that a certain threshold number of vehicular trips per day, that road can accommodate a middle turn lane that is the real turn lane, and all the turning movements happen out of that middle lane. And then the outside, there's 1 lane each in each direction, so it goes from 4 lanes to 3. And the outside lanes continue to carry that through traffic, just like the outside lanes were doing before. So what that does is it also has a benefit of just leaving you with an extra lane that you can then do whatever you want to do with that. So this was a concept that, and I'll just say that this was in the Beltline plan, where this was studied and adopted through the city. And so those outside lanes in the Beltline plan were recommended to be wider sidewalks on Monroe, because right now I think they're about 5 feet, and they could stand to be wider. So that was in the Beltline plan. That same concept ended up being adopted through the city's transportation plan. And so we came back around and to just look at a couple details. We wanted to make sure that pedestrian mobility was being accounted for crossing Monroe. So we've made recommendations through the plan to make sure that we have strong pedestrian signals and crosswalks at the intersections. We've even recommended having at the major intersections what we call an all pedestrian phase, where all the traffic stops at the intersection and it's only for pedestrians and bikes to move across the intersection for that time. So we're recommending that. The other thing that came out through the process was this idea of taking Park and Monroe and doing a roundabout at that intersection, because it's wide enough that you can do that. And so that's another idea that came up through the process. You'll have to make sure, and we talk about this in the plan, but you have to back the crosswalks off a little bit from the roundabout and do a little bit further away from the center of the roundabout to still make sure you can do the pedestrian movements, but you can do that by having active pedestrian crossing. You can activate the pedestrian signal. And you've seen, there's good examples of these better pedestrian crossing signals now, and I think the one I like the best is there's one on North Avenue across from the Georgia Tech Stadium, and pedestrians activate the light that stops the traffic, and then pedestrians can cross. So those are recommendations we've made for Monroe to continue to make sure pedestrians can cross Monroe. The other thing,
At what intersection?
that would be for the whole Monroe from 10th Street to the edge of the neighborhood, so up to Park. And there's also, just so you know, Piedmont Heights, which is everything, Ansley Park Mall, that portion of Piedmont, they have the same exact concept in their master plan. So there's and it's in the city's transportation plan too, so the system would be larger than just your little portion of the neighborhood. So one key thing to note here is that I think, and this is what we say in the master plan, but I think the priority long-term with the road diet is that you should have the wider sidewalks on Monroe. I think that ultimately the Beltline is going to keep connecting up through Piedmont Park, and that's going to carry bike traffic better, I think, than Monroe will do. But the easiest way to do the road diet, what makes the road diet easy, I should say, is that it's just a restriping. So, every so many years, the city will resurface a street, it'll restripe a street, and it's very simple and cheap for the city to just change the striping of the street. And so a road diet can be just a restriping, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money in infrastructure. So this can happen relatively quickly. The funding, to build the sidewalks wider on both sides of Monroe, that will take a little bit of time. That'll be an expensive project. So what we say in the master plan is that, yes, the priority should be on sidewalks for Monroe, wider sidewalks on Monroe. But until the funding is in place for that, and since the restriping can happen relatively quickly, and the Beltline bike trail also isn't up and running yet, all the way through Piedmont, to go ahead and use that extra width for bikes while you're waiting for the funding for the wider sidewalks and for the Beltline to get up and running. The other thing I want to mention about the road diet that wasn't mentioned in the Beltline plan for it and the Connect Atlanta plan for it is, to me, this is also about trying to stake a claim in your neighborhood that Monroe is still a part of your neighborhood, and that you have single-family neighborhood on both sides of Monroe. In that way, it's pretty similar to Virginia Avenue, where Virginia Avenue is definitely a busier road in the neighborhood, but it's not such a road that the people who live on it find it intolerable. And I think Monroe is getting to that point, and that's what we've heard through the process. And I think that the goal would be to make sure that Monroe Drive continues to be a street that people can live on, and that you can have a neighborhood on both sides of Monroe Drive, and it's viable. And right now, I think is the opportunity to, given that this concept works from a traffic standpoint, with the amount of cars that are on the road, I think it's a chance to stake that claim and help that both sides of the neighborhood get stitched back together. And not that they're apart, but you know, it's just a busy road. And I think there's a way to still have a busy road, but that has viable single family on both sides. I think the road diet does that.
Question.
Yeah, hang on, I'd like him to go through the whole format. Please state your question, we'll get to it at the end. We'll do it in that order.
What we're doing for questions, for those of you who came in late, we've asked people to write down their questions on the index cards, and we'll collect them when Aaron's done, and we'll do about a half hour of questions. And for those questions that we don't get through here, we will prepare an FAQ document where we will answer the questions. So that's the format that we're using for questions. And if you need an index card, we'll run out and make sure that they're on the table there.
Okay, so, all right, so Virginia Avenue, the next one I want to cover. All right, so for Virginia Avenue, we started at the charrette here. We explored this idea of, and this is a lot of the planning process, is sometimes we just want to throw ideas out and see what the response is and see if which way this idea goes. So for Virginia Avenue, we threw out this concept of what if we had bike lanes on both sides of Virginia Avenue? Well, you can't do bike lanes on both sides of Virginia Avenue without getting rid of on-street parking on at least one side. And so what we heard through that was that at the end of the day, it just isn't worth it. It's ultimately more desirable to retain the on-street parking. You have a real limit with parking with the homes that are on Virginia Avenue. So there is that part of it. You also, Virginia Avenue on the east side starts to carry on a commercial district parking role, and people park on it, going to the businesses. On the west side, people use it for school, to get to school, to pick up at school. Teachers park there during the day. And so ultimately we decided it just wasn't going to work. So the concept that we have for Virginia Avenue is a concept where part of the street would have sharrows and part of the street would have a delineated bike lane, and that would shift on half of the street. So from Monroe to the school, or actually I think it's to Barnett. So from Monroe to Barnett, you would have, actually let me look up to make sure I know which is which. I think it's the south side has the bike lane. Yeah, so the south side of Virginia Avenue, from Monroe to Barnett, has a bike lane on the south side because you're going up the hill to get from west to east. And then it has a sharrow on the north side because it's going downhill from the top of the hill down to Monroe.
Might want to define things for people that don't know what a sharrow is, because I have one.
Okay, yeah. So a sharrow is, if you've seen these streets that just have a bike symbol on the street, or might have arrows with a bike under it, and what it means is that it's telling the driver you need to share the road and you share the lane. This lane is meant to be shared for cyclists and for cars. It's clearly not as strong of a visual cue as a lane is, a bike lane that has a continuous stripe. But it is a way to do more than nothing. It's a way to communicate something and to communicate that this lane is intended to be shared for cyclists.
And still parking on both sides?
Right, that's right, yeah. So, because if you notice on Virginia Avenue now, it is a little bit wide for the travel lanes, but it's not wide enough to do actual dedicated bike lanes and keep the on-street parking. So this is an example of something we started with, and as we got into the process, we changed it and we tweaked it to modify it to keep the on-street parking on both sides. So then, to just finish that thought, on the east side of Barnett, as we go from Barnett to North Highland, they would flip. And so the bike lane would now be on the north side of Virginia, and that marked Sharrow would be on the south side of Virginia. It's not the ideal scenario, but it's something that you can do to delineate a space for cyclists, and at least do something to make it a little bit safer for the folks who want to bike on Virginia. So we also called out a recommendation for Inman Middle to do a textured paving along Park, just from Virginia up alongside the school, to try and denote and demark a slower zone and a space, because there's going to be buses that will now come through from the school's plan to pull off and to drop off there. So that was another detail that we've added in that. Okay, so another concept is the Druid Hills Presbyterian Church. So what we're trying to do here is we want to try and pull in more parking to serve the commercial parking node of St. Charles. All three of the commercial nodes have some degree of challenges for parking. The Amsterdam node is the least challenged, and then Virginia-Highland has challenges, but then St. Charles has some real challenges to provide commercial parking. And granted, more and more people, I think, are taking transit and walking and biking, but we believe that there is still a challenge. And so one of the ideas here is that we have a large parking lot with the church, and the frontage of the church is on Ponce, but then they also have the access to St. Charles. And so the idea here is to make that parking lot that's unused for really most of the week, to use that parking lot to be accessory for the commercial uses at the node, to be viable for a destination for customers to come and park. So there's a few things that need to go along with that, though. It's not super visible, so there would have to be signage, directional signage that become a part of implementing that recommendation to make it viable, so people would really know that it's a place to go to park for the district. It's not at the moment, because it's not used as a commercial lot. It's not managed. It's not supervised. And so that would need to be a part of implementing this recommendation in the plan. It would need to function like a real lot that has supervision and management. It needs to be clean. It needs to have somebody on site the whole time to be supervising and oversight of the site and the property. Somebody to go to in case of emergency, or somebody that you can get a hold of. It needs to be clean. It needs to be maintained. It needs to be well lit. It needs to be the kind of thing that isn't scary. So there's a lot of just sort of obvious kinds of things that need to happen to make it a really workable, viable lot, but it's possible. And so that ties in with, well, the other thing I'll say about that is that will need to get a rezoning into the neighboring commercial district. So the St. Charles commercial node is in the St. Charles neighborhood commercial zoning district. So for this church and its parking lot to get used and to be accessible for businesses, it would need to be a part of the same zoning district to allow those businesses to move their parking to that node, that lot. So that's part of our recommendation for that one. So that ties right into North Highland Avenue. So this was another one of these big conversations that we had during the process. Originally, we wanted to consider, could it be possible to have bike lanes on North Highland? And as we really got into this discussion, we found that North Highland, just like Virginia, it's not possible to keep the current arrangement of on-street parking on both sides and have bike lanes and to have the travel lanes. And so we really had a lot of conversation with commercial property owners and with also leveraging the input we were hearing through the process, and tried to come to terms with what's possible on the island. And what we realized through the process was that ultimately bike lanes would be nice, But ultimately, I think the pedestrian movement is really prioritized by more people through the commercial district versus the bike movement. So in other words, the pedestrians are always moving through the commercial district. Whether they got there on bike or whether they got there on car, everyone ends up being a pedestrian in the commercial node at St. Charles. And so it's really tight. It's really limited and challenging today, the sidewalk. And so what we realized is that if we had any ability to widen something, that it ought to probably be the sidewalk infrastructure. And so because of that thinking, we realized that we could only carve out enough to make the sidewalk better, and there's really not enough to do that and to try and carve out bike lanes as well. The other thing that we're working with here is that, if you got rid of on-street parking on both sides, then yeah, you probably could do the bike lanes and have a wider sidewalk. But again, this is a node that's had some real challenges with parking. And there's a sensitivity to getting rid of any on-street parking, really. So our recommendation in the plan is that coupled with this concept of having the church parking lot, providing it's somewhere between 100 and 125 spaces that the church parking lot has. So the idea we have is if we can pull the church parking lot into play and make it something that it can be used for businesses at the node, that we could then remove the 22 spaces that are on the west side of North Highland. So we get 120. If we can remove the 22 on the west side, that we make a wider sidewalk out of the west side of North Highland. And at the same time, we would integrate this concept of the sharrows so that there would be the shared bike signage on the street through the commercial node. It's not a bike lane, but it's a sharrow. We took it another step further, and some of you may have seen this if you travel or if you are interested in these things. That it started in San Francisco, and now it's spread to other cities, New York and Chicago and Seattle. That there's this way of doing extended sidewalks and streetscapes that are called parklets. And the idea is that you basically are creating, you're using a temporary structure, so like a wooden flooring, an elevated flooring that goes where the parking spaces were. And it's the same height, it's built to be the same height as the sidewalk, but it's mobile. It's secured into the ground, but it can be pulled up at some point. And it's not pavement, it's not poured concrete. And so what's happening in other cities is that it's becoming a quick and cheap way to extend a sidewalk, and the same sort of things can happen on it. So you can do outdoor dining, you can do vending, you can do little parks. People are using them to create little tiny pocket parks in other cities where they're really challenged for parks. And so our recommendation is that you leverage the St. Charles node, and eventually you could do this with other nodes too, to take the west side of the street and to make parklets out of it. The good news there is it's temporary. It's something that could be done as a test case sort of scenario. It's the kind of thing that if it just doesn't work for whatever reason, you can pull them up and go back to exactly the way it was before. But it also would be fun, I think, for Virginia-Highland to be the first neighborhood in Atlanta to have this thing that's popping up in other cities and to be the commercial districts in the city that have parklets. So that's where we ended up with that for North Highland. So another concept was this idea of accessory dwellings. So one of the things that we heard through the process, and again, I put this in this healthy living category, and I was really surprised by this, but we heard a number of people who expressed a desire to be able to live in the neighborhood with a smaller unit, a smaller housing unit. And some of this was expressed by people in the community who do currently live in the neighborhood in a smaller unit and wanted to continue to be able to live in the neighborhood in a smaller unit in the future. There's also just nationally, this is something that we're seeing as planners, that there's a bigger desire for folks who are even on the other end of the spectrum. There's people who have lived in a community for a number of years who are at the point where they feel like they have to leave the community to be able to retire or downsize into something else. And so you're seeing this come about in other cities, like Decatur, for example, has just amended their single-family zoning districts to allow these in all their zoning districts. So that somebody could still live on a property if they own the property, and they could move to something smaller in the back, and they could choose to rent out the house in the front, but they could live in the back. And so what we started out with this, we threw this out there. This is, again, one of these things that we threw out there to see how this would be received by the community. And so the idea is to allow accessory dwelling units to happen in the single family, because today it's not allowed in your zoning, it's not allowed. So you can't live in the back of a house, in the back of above a garage in your zoning. And so there's a lot of questions about that. There's also a lot of curiosity, because this is something you actually all have fought for years. You've really worked hard to make sure that somebody didn't end up doing that. And when I say you, the neighborhood has done this over the last few decades. And so what we've done now is we've said, okay, this should be something that you all should continue to talk about this. And the city is about to redo their entire zoning ordinance. And when they redo their entire zoning ordinance, this is one of those concepts the city wants to consider. How can they do more of accessory dwelling units in the backs of yards and the backs of lots? They want to do more with that. And so what we've said in the master plan is that you as a neighborhood should continue this conversation with the city and see if it's possible to identify a way that this could be done where any of the negative issues that you may associate with them could be mitigated or addressed. So if it's an issue of, you don't want the maximum lot coverage of a lot to be exceeded, well then that's something that you should make sure can be addressed. It may be an issue if you just don't want someone in your rear backyard looking now in the back of your house. Well, is there a way to address screening and the locations of windows in an accessory dwelling? So our recommendation is, we think there is, from a planning perspective, a need for the ability to preserve more affordable housing options within the community, and continue to work with the city as they update the zoning ordinance and as they consider this topic to see if it can match your neighborhood and can be done in a way that works for your neighborhood. So not super aggressive, but also we don't want you to lose that. We don't want you to leave that concept behind. We want you to keep working on that and see if it can work for you. The next thing is this issue of design guidelines. So this is another one that got a lot of conversation in the neighborhood and through the website and at the meetings. So the idea here is that we heard a lot through the process. This was actually one of the #1 things that we heard in the month of October from the folks who said this is something I don't like in the community, and a lot of folks mentioned infill or new construction. So what we're saying here is that design guidelines, we think, is a way to start to address the aesthetic of new construction in the neighborhood for single family, but also not going as far as a historic district through the city of Atlanta, which has really been the way that the city has dealt with any sort of design aspect to a single family neighborhood. For the last 30 years, if a neighborhood wanted houses to have any sort of aesthetic to it at all, then the way you did that was through a historic district. And now the last 10 years, in commercial districts all over the city started creating other ways that you could address commercial development design without having a historic district. So your neighborhood commercial districts are a great example. So you have 3 neighborhood commercial districts. They're new zoning districts written by the city for St. Charles, Virginia-Highland, and Amsterdam. They are not historic districts. But what they did was they said in these districts,